and thanks to our panelists for being here. So we'll jump right in. What were the academic and extracurricular requirements of your ABC programs? And were there any tools you wish you had in your adjustment process? And whoever wants to go first can unmute.
I can start. Real quick, shout out to both of my host families who are on and watching this. Hi, the Cages and the Brooks. Academic requirements for the Darien program, it might look a little different now, but when I was there, I believe we had to maintain at least a B average. You know, it was expected that you were enrolled in honors and AP courses, and that you were taking a full course load every academic year. And then extracurricular requirements, we didn't have specific requirements in terms of what we did after school. You could volunteer, you could play sports, you could be a part of the yearbook committee if you wanted to, but the requirement was that we were out of the house 3 days a week. Most of us were out probably Monday through Thursday, unless we were playing a sport, which then was every day. So we kind of took Fridays off to relax or go to our host families or kind of gear up for whatever the weekend had planned for us.
Very similarly, yeah, we were expected to be out of the house, you know, doing something, whatever you interpreted that to be, is what you did. And then, yeah, aside from the grades that we had to uphold to be in the program without suffering any consequences, but anything that, you know, tutoring that you would need was available to us, which was very fortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, very similar to what Angelica and Demisi said. We had academic requirements in Wilton, and we had to either do a sport, which kind of blindsided me, or be a part of a club. And along with that, we also had activities that we would do over the weekend, whether that was volunteering or events for the program or other activities like that, which kind of were scheduled for us and were mandatory. So that kind of did not leave us a lot of room to relax over the weekend, but still everything was very interesting and fun.
Hi, good evening. My name is Victoria. I graduated a long time ago, so I kind of feel like I forgot what the requirements were. I know I had to maintain a certain GPA, but at the same time, I think for extracurricular, we had to be involved in clubs. I think sports were tricky because going in 9th grade and having a lot of people who started sports in 4th or 5th grade, it was hard to find to get in or to even try it out. But we kept busy with like community service or in school clubs like National Honor Society. My roommate and I, Jessica, who's watching, we did something called NAACP AXO, which was Afro Cultural Technological Olympics, which was a great program. So that's how I was able to be involved while at Fayetteville Manlius High School.
Yeah, and kind of to reiterate our earlier point, like our GPA requirement, I think was like a 3.3, which is the B average, I'm pretty sure. So we had to do that. And then in terms of extracurriculars, almost all of us played a sport. And if we didn't play a sport, we had the option of managing teams. So a lot of us that didn't want to play, let's say, another sport in their off season would manage another team, which was awesome.
Cool. Emerson, I'll start with you for this next question. How did you overcome the imposter syndrome and the feeling that you needed to prove you belonged in this space?
Yeah, I mean, that was tough. To be honest, I don't think I ever overcame it. Like, I'm a highly competitive person, and I always have a chip on my shoulder, and that added a chip on my shoulder entering the space where, you know, everyone is going to see color first. They're going to see you as the Black person in any setting, right? And on the sports field, you're supposed to be athletic because you're Black. you're in a classroom, they kind of have expectations of how you perform. So I'm not sure that I ever beat the imposter syndrome or like figured out a way around it. I just tried to perform to the best of my ability, and I try not to have that like way too much on me. I did have a lot of brothers, the people I lived with, that I would talk to if it ever felt like it was too much, and that wasn't too often.
Anyone else want to take that question?
I can go. I like Emerson. I don't know if I ever really overcame the imposter syndrome that I felt. I think, I was the only scholar in my year, and there were no other Black students. We had maybe like 1.5 Latin students in my grade. So it was me, and it was me through and through all 4 years by myself. And I think that comes with a lot of hostility. A lot of people will tell me like, oh, you're an angry high school kid. But I think, that was me being combative and me trying to kind of assert myself in this completely white town where there was no one really advocating for me. And I think, that manifests in so many different ways. But it also manifests a lot in my space and how I was viewed back at home as well. You try to acclimate to the environment of Darien. And I think that definitely kind of reverted back to when I would go home and spend time with my family. You get a lot of comments like, oh, you think you're a white girl now? Like, you have Uggs and you look like this and you're straightening your hair a lot. So what's going on? And, that's something that I'm still kind of recouping from. But I don't know if you ever really get over the imposter syndrome. It's also the fact that you are fighting every day to prove that this is where you belong, even if it's academic, if it's extracurricularly, and you are trying to create this space for yourself. And, when your other friends or your host siblings they're born into this, they don't have to fight to prove that they're worthy of being in this town or in this space, because this is their life, this is their day-to-day. And I think it takes a lot of community building to really ensure that as an ABC scholar, you feel comfortable. Luckily, both of my host families were really, really good about that, making me feel as comfortable in their house as I did at the ABC house. And my situation was a little different because my resident director was a teacher at our high school. So we had kind of that aspect as well, where other teachers knew us more personally than maybe they knew some of the other students, but they also knew us and could understand where we were coming from, because we had a voice in the academic building that was advocating for us more than just, teachers that wanted to do well by us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think one big way that I overcame, or maybe was able to shift, I don't know if overcame is the word I would use, but my support system, the reassuring, I'm proud of you, really allowed me to be certain in the fact that I worked for this, I earned where I am. And spending 8 hours a day minimum with some of my peers, it's like very easy to be like, okay, you were definitely born into this, and good for you, that chances on your side, but I'm focused and I'm on a mission, and I know my worth and my work ethic, and that was just really reassuring those 4 years.
As everybody else said, I don't think you can overcome the imposter syndrome. And I think it's also speaking to the point where in these schools, whiteness was centered. There was no opportunity for my cultural background to be represented in the curriculum. So I always kind of felt like I never belonged. And the sense of belonging, it transcended it was in the ABC house and also at school. So there was never this sense of feeling like I belonged in any of the environments. In the ABC house, it was like the seniority. When we came in, the juniors and seniors, they ruled the house. There was no sense of community. And then when going to school, it was like, oh, you're the ABC girl because you're only one of a few Black girls in this building. So that also came with a set of assumptions. So it was very hard to ever belong in the environment. However, my sister's watching and she says she knows a lot of you, Amanda Allison. And I think that having my sisters and my parents and my support system at home, that's what helped me get through all 4 years there. I had to just stay really connected to home. I always look forward to going home. I look forward to when my family would come up and visit. And that's how I was able to survive.
And just to add, very similar to the other panelists, I don't think I ever did overcome imposter syndrome while I was still in the program, just because I constantly felt like I was proving myself. If I was in school, I was socially proving myself. If I was at the house, I was academically proving myself. And I was put in a position where I was like, oh man, do I really belong here? Is this something that I truly deserve? Knowing that I worked so hard to be a part of this program, and yet that idea was being challenged constantly. But I think something that really helped me was that I put my all into my academics and everything else that I was involved in, and I really excelled in that way. And through that, I was able to say to myself and prove to my family back at home, like, look at all the amazing things that I'm doing while I'm here. Like, I definitely belong here.
Right. And Angelica, I definitely connect with your experience because I also was the only one in my grade in ABC New Canaan. And it always felt like, you know, the other guys had at least one other person that they could go to. And it was sometimes hard when, especially with our program, like it was, you know, an unwritten rule that the guys, you know, we wouldn't talk to each other in school. So, I mean, we had a really good relationship in the house, but when it came to being in school, we just wouldn't talk to each other. Everyone was just, you know, trying to find their way as an individual in the school, which was hard for me because I was the only one in my grade. And so I know we were talking about cultural background a bit. So how was space made for your cultural background in your ABC house? And Leah, I kind of want to start with you on this one because there was a Wilton Boys house as well. So in your answer, could you also give like an insight on what that was like, that there was also a guy's house in Wilton?
Yeah, sure. So to answer the first question, I didn't really feel like there was space for my cultural background in the town or in the house or in the school, really. The school really didn't have any like non-Western subjects to learn about. And in the house, I think the most cultural things we did were like related to food. Maybe one of us would cook one weekend, a traditional dish to one of our cultures. But other than that, it felt pretty white. And then to talk a little bit more about the boys' house is, so we had a girls' house and a boys' house, two separate houses that both took in a Better Chance scholars. And it kind of similar to what you said, Devon, it was kind of like an unwritten rule that the girls in the boys' house wouldn't interact at school, even though when we had activities over the weekend, we were all pretty close. But then as the years started progressing and we got new scholars, the houses seemed to become pretty connected, and we would interact with each other at the school. Although it is a saying in the girls' house that the boys had a completely different experience than we had. And I guess only they can speak on their experiences, but to us in the girls' house, it seemed like they had it easier. But I would let any of the boys challenge me on that. But yeah.
Funny enough, everything Leah had just said, like, is the answer. There was not necessarily space, but I would be remiss if I didn't say that us as a house were really able to make space to, express who we are and express our identities, which, always felt nice, whether that was through food, whether that was, the way that we wore our hair, the way that we, unapologetically dressed. We definitely made space for ourselves, which I was definitely proud of.
So for us, it was being in Westport, we were really close to Norwalk, which isn't, I'm not sure if it's predominantly Black city, but it is a pretty well-populated city in terms of diversity. And we, on the weekends, not every weekend, maybe every other weekend, the whole house, all of the guys would go to the barbershop. And we will spend all day. We made like a day experience out of it. And that was one way that helped a lot of us like cope with not seeing ourselves reflected in the community. So now we spend all day talking about things that we want to talk about and seeing people that look like us and interacting with people that we feel are going through the same struggle or just like can connect to us. So that was one way we did that. We also had a cook that would always ask us like, what's your favorite dish from home? And it didn't really matter. We had people from all backgrounds. We had a couple people that were Korean. We had a couple people that were Mexican. We had a couple people that were Nigerian. I'm Caribbean. And she never like feared any type of dish. And she would ask, because I kind of make it an event. So like, oh, like this week we're going to make like Emerson's favorite food. Do you guys want to learn how to make it? Usually nobody wanted to learn, but we all partaked and like, you kind of had a nice like discussion over it, why we liked it and stuff like
that. That's great to hear, Emerson. I'm so jealous. For me, I went to high school between 2002 and 2006. So this was the beginning of internet. We couldn't have laptops, but I snuck one in, and I would have to but I would take the phone cord and plug it into the Ethernet, I think it was called. I don't even remember. And then like run it under the rug so that I can go on the internet. And I don't even know what I was so excited about. But I'm just like dating myself in that and saying like, this was before we could be like unapologetically Black. Like there was no Instagram where we can connect to other people and see people wearing their head wraps. This was when a lot of Black people were getting perms. So every 6 weeks we would go to the Dominican hair salon and get our hair permed or washed and blow dried because we wanted it to be straight. So I think that I was in high school around a time where we tried to assimilate and to conform. So it was very hard for me to really express my Cuban and my Jamaican side. But there were times in the house where we would, like after we came from home, we would come back to Syracuse with our Jamaican food. We would come back with whatever food we had from home and we would share. Or we had a RA who was also Jamaican. So sometimes she would make curry chicken or rice and peas. And those times there would be a sense of nostalgia and community, which was really nice.
So there's a few ways. For starters, and my mom is watching too, so she's gonna laugh when she hears this. Inside of the house on the weekends, our resident directors would cook, but they weren't the best cooks. So early my freshman year, my mom bought our resident director, it was actually her Christmas gift, a Puerto Rican cookbook. And I think all the girls in the house were like, finally, like something that she can base everything off of. And we went to the grocery store and we were like, okay, you got to get like the adobo and you have to get these seasonings. But they, luckily for us, they really embraced it. They weren't offended by it. They loved it. And they were like, yeah, we want to make this more homey environment for everybody. So if this is what it needs to take, then by all means, send cookbooks, have parents come and teach them if that's something that was feasible. I think in terms of the high school and the community itself, I don't think, at least when I was in high school, the town was culturally receptive to anything but Black or white. So you start going down this like you're a Latin person, but you grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. So how do you identify? And what does that mean? What does that look like? You know, what is your cultural background? People were confused by it. Almost everybody thought I was Black and white, as if they never heard of like Latin America or the Caribbean islands before, which was fine. But it was something that, you know, I kind of had to just suck up and be like, if I need to be the voice of every person of color for the students in my year, then I'm gonna have to be that person. I think on the flip side of that, I stood out a lot my freshman year. And I hope none of you guys remember this, but I had a student write a newspaper article about my sneaker collection my freshman year. And I was like nominated as one of the most influential people in Darien High School. But it was funny because I had no friends at this point. So it was like mortifying for someone to kind of single me out and be like, hey, she's cool because she has a nose ring and wears Jordan. You know, but I kind of also took that as a sign that people were going to be receptive to my identity. And if that had to be because I was the one that, you know, dressed differently, then that's what was going to be okay. It was going to make it okay. And then after that NERAD article, you know, it got sent to ABC National and they sent it out to all of the program, which was very embarrassing as well, but it's okay. I'm over it. I promise.
Cool. We'll move on to our next question, and this will be specifically for the women on this panel. How did you cope with not seeing yourself reflected anywhere, especially as a woman of color in these communities?
Well, for myself, in my counterparts, we were a year of 3, so I had 2 other freshmen join ABC with me at Richfield, and I'm the only Black presenting. I wasn't the only Black girl in the house, but in my class of 2016 at the high school, I stuck out like a sore thumb. So to kind of struggle just as a teenage girl who, you know, deals with, you know, body things or, you know, am I pretty enough, things like that. It's hard to kind of feel a little bit better when you're like, these are the beauty standards and like, this is what I look like. So, you know, for me, it was very important for me to, you know, look and feel good. And that definitely made me late for school sometimes, all the time, actually. But, you know, there are things that I had to just learn about myself to make me, you know, comfortable in who I am and who I was at the time, who I was hoping to become. But yeah, it was definitely a bumpy ride in terms of figuring out how to cope and how to deal with, you know, being a teenage girl that didn't look like the other teenage girls.
Anyone else have thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I can add to that. I think being in this space where I didn't see anybody who looked like me in such formative years and of my life and like in high school really led to a lot of insecurities. But I think a really good way that I coped with not seeing myself reflected in the community was just relying on the sisterhood that I have formed with the girls in the house. And I know we all came from different perspectives and backgrounds, but those girls are really my sisters, and we went through thick and thin together. And it was really that connection that I felt with them that allowed me to fully prosper in this environment.
For me at the time, I think I was just surviving on a daily basis. So I didn't really think about being a Black woman there at that time. I felt like I was a very confident teenager. Like going throughout high school, I was really confident in my academics. I knew why I was there. I kept the why in my mind. I was like, I'm going through this experience because I want to get to an excellent college. So I kept that in my mind. I also had really strong role models at home. My mom, my aunts were extremely strong and confident women. So I didn't need anyone after school to tell me about my worth. I didn't need them in order to feel validated. But in other ways that I just coped in general with the environment was I love to bake. So I baked all the time and every single day. And it was a way to help within our home, ABC house, a way to build community. So that's really what I did at the time.
The girls from my house and I, we talk about this a lot. And really it's more like reflecting on things that we did then that we didn't even realize we were doing. And I think there were kind of two paths you could take in terms of coping with being the only one. And I think for a lot of the girls, that was kind of just being quiet. And going to school and doing your work and going to your after school, participating when you needed to, and going home. For myself, I was the more outspoken one in the house, definitely the more rebellious one in the house, in kind of all aspects, academic, socially, with board members even. And I think that was definitely a coping mechanism. You know, if I had to die on every hill and fight every battle myself, I was going to. And, you know, I also come from a large family of mostly women who, you know, have all excelled in undergrad, post-grad, and their career paths. So I don't know if I necessarily needed to look for that in the high school. But I will say one way that, you know, we did cope with it as a unit was we stuck to ourselves. You know, so Devon, when you say it was an unspoken rule where the boys wouldn't talk to each other, that was the exact opposite for the girls in my house. We would seek each other out. We would look for each other during free periods, and we would sit together at lunch. And we became such kind of a tight-knit group that I think it almost maybe was a little bit intimidating for the other students to kind of break through that barrier or really get to know us. But we put up walls. We were protecting ourselves and our space as much as possible, so that way we weren't, you know, outcasted. We didn't want to feel that way, so we kept ourselves together and in our own group. But I think, you know, when you look back on it now, there was a lot of things that you miss that you don't realize that you're missing until you become an adult. And I think for me, that was really like very much a style standpoint, you know, like how did we adapt to the environment? You know, we straightened our hair. The girls would get relaxers. I would, you know, get a wash and set as much as I could because we wanted to minimize how much we stood out. And that's definitely a coping mechanism. You know, you change your physical appearance as much as possible, so that way, you know, you're not singled out in the classroom. But I think, you know, that also comes from being in a space where like your mom or your older sisters or your family are not really there to teach you how to do your hair, right? Like you're gone 6 weeks at a time. So what's the easiest thing to do? Straighten your hair rather than learning how to like maintain your curls or, you know, how to start the natural hair care journey, which a lot of the girls started post being in Darien. But I think another coping mechanism was that we really tried, at least for me, I will speak for myself, I really tried to help bridge all of the different houses. Because in my mind, it was very much like us against them, and not in a negative kind of way, but you know, the Darien house used to host the women's field day in Fairfield County. So at the beginning of the year, one of the first weekends, we would invite all of the girl houses over and we would have pizza and ice cream and we would play games in at our house. And I'm not sure if they still do that, but that was something that was kind of remarkable, which is how I met Amanda and how I met the Wilton girls and the Ridgefield girls and the Guilford girls. You know, and I think that was so essential. And we probably didn't even know it at the time, but being able to reach out to the Wilton girls and be like, hey man, like this sucks. Do you guys feel this way too? And them responding with, yeah, you're not alone. It's not just you. And I know Clark was watching and he likes when I talk about this, but we didn't have that relationship with the boys' houses. And I think, you know, a lot of that comes from the subliminal upholding of the patriarchy. The boys have a easier time typically assimilating into the town environment because you guys are more likely to play sports and maybe be good at them. Whereas a girl, you know, we never played lacrosse before in our lives. We're not going to start at 15 when everyone else has been playing since they were 6. You know, and I think that it can negatively impact you when you don't have allies at other houses. And I think it can negatively impact you when you're especially, you know, these are like formative years, and these are the years where you're starting to think about like dating people, and the other boys that look like you or that are in the same program as you, maybe, you know, you don't know any of them, but the boys at the high school also like are very intimidated by you. Because they've never experienced someone like you before. And that's not only the boys at the high school, that's also the girls at the high school as well. So, you know, I think in terms of coping, we don't know that we're doing it because it's so subconscious. And it's not until years later that you really start to realize like, oh yeah, this is why I did that. And this is how it made me feel. And, you know, we talk about it a lot now. Like, do you guys remember when X, Y, and Z happened? And at first it's a joke, and then you realize like, oh wait, I did that so I could fit in, or I did that because I didn't know how else to fit in, really.
And I'll shout you out for you know, planning and getting us together for the graduation party our senior year. That was a really cool event, and wish we had done more of that throughout my 4 years. So our last question for this panel will be, as alumni, how can you contribute to the evolution of the program? And whoever wants to start first can.
Mentorship. I think that's probably one of the best things, and you know, in the era of Zoom, and just this virtual, being able to connect virtually, I think that, you know, it's probably the best time to create those connections. For Ridgefield, we had mentors from, you know, alumni, and that only lasted for like a year or two. I'm not sure what happened, maybe scheduling, but it really felt good to connect with someone who did this like 10 years ago and is telling me that like, girl, don't even worry about it. You know, you got this. You know, and if, and we can only say if, because, you know, the universe only knows how much heartache and how much, you know, just how many boo-boos could have been avoided if, you know, that mentorship was fostered and nurtured and continued. So I think that that's probably one of the bestest ways to make this process, you know, a little more seamless for the students coming in and the students that are, you know, doing the thing. So yeah.
Yeah, one thing I think of is sitting on the board of directors for your program, your CSP program. Something that Angelica spoke to very early on was like that duality that you have, and trying to like bridge that is something that is so daunting for a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, even 17-year-old. And I think it's unique to a lot of the scholars. Like, you won't be able to tell somebody that experience. You need to have gone through it, right? It's not a learned experience. So with that, like having someone, at least as an alumni, trying to go back and work with the program through that route, I think would be amazing. Also providing resources and in line with the mentorship, like, actually talking to the scholars and see what they're interested in and see what helps them. I think of sports is the easiest one for me to think of, but like I remember someone said earlier, like, you're not going to pick up a lacrosse stick at 15. I started volleyball when I was in my program, and everyone that I was playing and trying out against, they started back in 6th grade. So like, it was pretty intimidating. I made the team, but I made the team because of one of my friends in the community. Like, his dad ran a camp, and he invited me to like a pre-camp tryout. Right, that's something I wouldn't have had access to or resources to go to beforehand. So I think about things like that, right? So someone that might want to work in theater or be a theater tech, like, how can you provide them with certain resources that are unique to what they want to do?
I agree with what everyone has said, and I think mentorship is key. From hearing about your experiences in Connecticut is very different from being the only girls' school. I think the only girls' school in New York State, Fayetteville Manlius. It was 5 hours away from home. Like, we didn't have the connections and the bonds between other schools like you did. So really letting the girls who are in Fayetteville Manlius know there are people who have gone through this program who have been in your shoes. I also agree with being on the board. I'm going to reach out to my program and see, like, is there a way? How do I get on the board of this program as an alum? How can I help the program go further? And two other things is giving back. So making sure I donate to FM, but also National A Better Chance. And the last one I was thinking about was just making a set of demands. At the school where I work in the city, students have come together to make demands, and I think, and even alum. So when I'm thinking about demands, I'm thinking there should be social and emotional support for students who are going through this program. There should be guidance counselors and therapists. Students are going, especially as a teenage girl, I feel like there's so much to contend with. And given racial tensions now too, I just can't even imagine what it's going to be like when the students leave home and go back to the houses, the ABC houses where they live. So social emotional support. I think the academic support is something that they've already got down, but making sure that I want the board to make sure that they are attending to the whole child and the whole person.
I think for me, one of the biggest aspects that I try to focus on is one, going back and visiting the girls. Doesn't necessarily, I mean, in the age of COVID, and now probably will have to be virtual. But that's something that I've made a point of doing. I try to go at least once a year, if not twice a year. Obviously, the further away you live, the more difficult it can be. But I think one thing that I would really like to see implemented is not only the transition into the high school and into the town, but also the transition back home at the end of every year. Because I think that's something that played such a huge role in my life. When I was in high school, how do you reacclimate to living in an environment that you have not been living in? I mean, for me, like, I grew up in the projects in New York, which literally is the complete opposite of the town of Darien. And what does that reintegration really look like for me? There was really no support from the program. Not that I necessarily expected there to be, but it was also hard because I didn't have that support from my family either. My family obviously 100% supported me, but they didn't really understand what reintegrating into living with your parents looked like for a summer, or reintegrating into a community that you have been out of for so long. And I think that transition back home is equally as difficult as the transition to these towns. So really kind of navigating that environment and really supporting scholars when they return to their homes, and how to support families, and how to teach parents and siblings on how to support their scholar that has been away for 10 months.